So it's my great pleasure to introduce Chris tonight, who agreed to give us a talk on environmental stewardship. Chris was born in Vancouver, spent most of his life on the BC coast. He has a BSc in environmental biology from the University of Alberta in Edmonton, and went to do a master's on marine biology in Belgium. I asked him if he would give us the talk in French, just for something different, but he declined. He said he actually took his studies in Belgium in English. So Chris moved to Salt Spring in 2005 and has had a very long association with the Conservancy. He's worked for us, done all sorts of field work on our reserves, building trail, maintaining trail, helping with signage, fencing, invasive plant removal, and so on. Chris has created his own company, Coast Alive Recreational and Ecological Services. He believes in keeping a minimal footprint in his work, uses an e-bike and trailer whenever possible to get to his job sites. And today we'll be talking to us about some of his experience working in the conservation area, both, I guess, in some of our reserves, as well as some of the private work that he does on people's property. So Chris, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, super. Thank you, Pierre and Deborah. And thank you to the Salt Spring Island Conservancy for having me. I will share my screen and we'll get going here. It's wonderful to see all of these people and familiar names. I don't see the faces, of course, but it's nice to know you're here.
Oh, Chris, sorry, I hate to interrupt. I just should have mentioned, if you have any questions for Chris during his presentation, please use the chat line that is available on the bottom of the screen. Press chat, type in your comment. You can send them to everyone. You can send them to the moderator, probably. Deborah, it might go to you only if you send it to moderators, so presumably to everyone. I'll be monitoring those, and then we'll have a question and answer session after his talk. Thank you. Sorry again, Chris.
Okay. Yes, please, lots of questions. I'll try and make sure there's time. Okay, I love descriptive titles. Environmental stewardship on private and protected land. Small scale ecosystem restoration through a combination of invasive plant control, wildlife habitat enhancement, and wildfire risk reduction. My name's Chris Drake. My company is now called Coast Alive Stewardship Services. I changed the name just a few months ago. And thank you to the Conservancy once again. As well as acknowledging and being thankful for being on this land, I'd like to talk a little bit about, first of all, about First Nations and how they are really the original stewards of this land. They're really so knowledgeable, and I've learned a huge amount from them. And two ways that we can all learn more and use stewardship as part of our personal reconciliation is to learn more about traditional ecological knowledge, ethnobotany. This is a classic book that everybody knows, but it actually has a lot of wonderful information about how First Nation peoples used the plants of the area. And this is another one that I've just found out about recently, and it's really, really cool. So definitely worth learning, picking these up and learning about how the First Nations used our native plants. And the other thing I think it's really important to think about is learning whether we are on actually named and significant archaeological sites. There's a website here from the BC government that you can request this information. It's not publicly available. And I'd really encourage you all to see this recent movie that came out, Suhalem, by this First Nation elder, grave digger, extraordinary man, Harold Joe. I just want to tell a little story that really affected me quite recently. I was working on a small restoration project on a place here on Salt Spring called Mahina Creek. And because it was in, there's a midden there, so we had a couple of, it's an Islands Trust Conservancy covenant, and we had, yes, we had a couple of First Nation Indigenous youth working with me. And on our first day working there, we discovered that the midden was a lot more extensive, and we felt like we shouldn't be digging in these areas, even just to put in native plants. That's all we were doing. So it was decided that a cultural advisor would come out, and Harold Joe came out. And within about 10 minutes, he had found a couple of bones where we were working, and they turned out to be deer bones. But it was decided that at that point we would move the site a little bit, and he would be there with us in case we found things, and he could advise us on that. So we finished that job. That was really interesting. And then a month later, by pure coincidence, I was working on a Nature Conservancy of Canada nature reserve under Mount Suhalem near Duncan. Maybe you all know about it. It's where there's this big cross. Anyhow, it's a magical little nature reserve with this incredible rock formations and Gary Oak forest. And so I'm working there and doing my stuff. And then I went and saw this movie, Suhalem, by Harold Joe, and it was filmed right where I was working. Apparently, when the Haida raiding parties would come down from the north, then the local First Nations would run up into these sort of caves, these areas to hide from them. So it was really fascinating, and I guess it was a very powerful moment. I just wanted to sort of share that. It really made me feel excitement for the future. And I really recommend, again, you see this movie, Suhalem. It's really fascinating. Okay. Okay, so here's my outline. I'm going to have a pause in the middle of it. So first of all, I'll just quickly go through an introduction, a bit of the sort of my work philosophy, and then talk about the boring stuff, which is invasive plant control. And after that, a good section on native tree and shrub planting and protecting. After that comes the fun stuff, the wildlife habitat enhancement is my favorite part of my work, and the wildfire risk reduction, which is not terribly exciting, but really great for the ecosystem. And then if we have time, we'll just chat quickly about creating a multi-year stewardship plan. Now, this really is one of the best jobs imaginable. Pierre already said a fair bit about my background, so I'm not going to get into my education. While I was doing all this schooling, I was also tree planting and traveling and working in parks and trying to volunteer with different environmental non-governmental organizations. And slowly I morphed into this reality. So in 2005, I started up Coast Alive Services, and that was basically started as ecological gardening and then morphed into this sort of environmental stewardship idea. And I've got a wonderful pile of clients, Salt Spring Island Conservancy being one of them, but I also work for private landowners, Islands Trust Conservancy, and some stratas as well. There's a fantastic dedicated community on this island and across all of the coast, I think, for environmental stewardship. And you know, through my work, I guess I've got a bit of a reputation, which is nice. And so I think part of the reason I have that reputation is I have sort of a philosophy behind my work. Really the main thing is about stepping lightly. We have to remember we're out there to restore the land, restore the native plants, the native animals, insects. We want to step lightly. We try and use the same trail, try not to step on rotting logs. Try and reduce your local and your global footprint. And by that I mean your local footprint is you stomping in the, around in the woods, that has a footprint. And your global footprint is, the gas you use to get to work and such things. So I think a lot about those two things while I'm working. I really try and avoid machines. I don't need many machines. Most stuff I use will fit into my bike trailer, which I electrified this bike and I just bomb around. It's fantastic. It's a lot of fun, but it's also reduces my costs actually quite a lot. So there's economic and environmental reasons for that sort of thing. I believe in advocacy. I'm on the board of the Salt Spring Island Water Preservation Society. So shout out WPS. They're a great group, been around for quite a few decades here on island. And yes, I do like to have some fun as well. But I also have some guiding research behind this philosophy. And there's two sort of main points I want to touch on before I get into the nitty-gritty of the stewardship. And the first thing is this idea that the best way to combat climate change and biodiversity loss is to plant the right native tree in the right place. There's some really strong research supporting this idea of how incredible trees are, how connected forests are. Diana Beresford Kruger is one of the great minds behind this. Also, Dr. Suzanne Simard, who's done this wonderful work on how trees are connected below the ground. And the other concept I really think about a lot is this idea that small patches, small areas can have really large results when it comes to increasing biodiversity, because biodiversity depends on spatial niches. Basically the idea, and this is a simplified way, it's not necessarily this way for species or ecosystems at risk, but it's essentially the more diversity of plants and the more diversity of niches will encourage higher diversity of flora and fauna. A big part of this for me would be the work done by E.O. Wilson, the late E.O. Wilson, especially his work with insects. I'll be talking about insects more later. So restoration is very complex, wonderfully complex. We're talking about thousands of species evolving for hundreds of thousands of years together. But stewardship is quite simple. It's you out there doing what you can. It is not landscaping. And this is important. You need to check your human aesthetics at the door. And for me, it's also, it's an antidote to environmental depression. I've studied so much of the terrible things that happen in this world. And for me, just nothing can beat stewardship. When you know what you're doing, you get right into the work and you feel like you're connected to all the flora and fauna you're trying to help. So there's a good personal reason for getting into this type of work. So I just wanted to talk about this concept for a second, and I chose where will nature be in 100 years? And I chose 100 years because I can sort of visualize it. My grandparents were alive 100 years ago. Of course, from a tree's perspective, 100 years is, they're kind of in their teens, depending on the tree. But so where will this nature be in 100 years? And this isn't only a philosophical concept, but it's actually very practical. we want to be doing this work. We want to be planting trees in places where they're going to reach maturity and beyond to be part of a forest. So will this be parks and protected areas? We do have parks that are 100 years old, so that's encouraging. If it's private land, you know, how much of this land that we own will be like this? I've planted maybe 50 trees around my half acre that I live on. Who knows how many, or if any, will reach maturity. And if you are planting on your land, what part of your land? Would it be maybe close to the house that will survive, or around the edges? I work a lot on covenants, and I think this is one of the most positive things for nature and conservation. And please, if you have the land and the option and the opportunity, please covenant your land. Okay, so that's just the introduction part. I guess it's time to get to work. So I want to show everybody the tools of the trade. Okay. I think that's about right. Give me one moment, please, to adjust my view. So, like I say, I only really work with hand tools. It's pretty handy. Way to go. Get yourself a good tool belt. Good. Adjust this. Tools of the trade. Your sequiturs. Get good quality, preferably with a replaceable blade. Good quality handsaw, also with a replaceable blade. This is a Silky. Of course, it's all very dangerous work in the end, so I very much recommend that you wear your safety glasses and good quality gloves. I picked up these Wicked ones recently. They're fantastic for working with blackberry and gorse and holly. Planting shovels. This is my old handy tree planting shovel. It's like, and then this is a bigger blade if you're trying to get a bit deeper. Good quality loppers. I prefer this system with the teeth. You can get a lot more power into it, and then you can get a lot bigger. I like to use these often with blackberry. There's a kind of system, if you got a really bad blackberry patch, you can do a chop and stomp. You can do that also with reed canary grass. And then I love this little tool when I'm doing weeding, things like yellow flag iris, wherever you have to get roots out, really handy. It's important when you're doing this work to try and minimize, of course, any soil disturbance. And it's really, really important to think about your disposal. We're going to talk a bit more about this later, but this is my system. Either if it's smaller stuff, you can use this type of bucket. I put holes in the bottom, so if you're using it with yellow flag iris, the water can go through. But this is really the best system I've found. And it's a garbage can, yeah, great. Okay, so if you're doing something like broom, for instance, you're cutting broom, and you know broom is kind of really spreads out. I think of it nearly like a hand. Well, you chop off all the fingers and you get them really tight together, and you make it like really tight spaghetti sort of idea. If it's a different plant that's more squishable, then you can stomp into it. stomp down. The idea is to get it as dense as possible in there, but it's still really easy. So you're not dragging anything across the ground or anything. You can easily pick it up and walk with it. And then when you unload it, it comes out like this really kind of like a cork kind of, and it stays really compact. So it encourages decomposition. So I wanted to take this moment to show you tools because it's really simple stuff. You don't need anything if we need ever to have a chainsaw. I have this lovely little battery one, but other than that, this stewardship is about, it's really is grunt work, basically. It's getting down and dirty. And it's physical and it's kind of boring, but you have to remember that there's a good reason for it. Back here. So let's talk about invasive plant control. First thing I kind of want to say is that you need to prioritize. This is a really interesting study I found. Does this invasive species removal lead to ecological recovery? There was a kind of a meta-analysis, and they looked at both flora and fauna removal, so everything from rats to milfoil to bullfrogs, and they found that half the time there was a positive outcome, but up to 20% of the time there's actually a negative outcome. For instance, sometimes it might have led to soil erosion or just one invasive plant getting replaced by another invasive plant, which I've seen happen plenty of times here. So basically, when you're controlling invasive plants, it's really site and species specific. And it really, the thing to remember is in this study, the words invasive species removal. So it's not control, and these weren't actually invasive plant control programs that had also planting programs, native species planting programs. Basically, you need to have a strong native plant community to generally turn the tide. And you need to learn about changing the soil and changing the light, and that's going to help you control invasive plants. So this isn't about eradicating an unwanted species, it's about restoring the native plants and making them strong and competitive. So you got to know your plants. Think of them sort of as their strengths and weaknesses, and, you know, exploit those weaknesses. You also need to know your native plants because they're the ones that are going to do the work for you, really. So when you're setting your priorities for your invasive plant control, think about which ecosystems have the higher ecological value. For instance, clearing beside the road might be less important than clearing in the middle of a forest or any wetland area, certainly. Try and work in areas that already have a community of native plants. You know, otherwise sometimes you'll just be doing the same work every year and not making any progress. And work sort of from the edges in, so work beside the natural areas, because they can, you know, the edge effect will help you with your work and have you higher success rate. I'll just talk about one species here, just to sort of explain what I mean. This is yellow flag iris removal work that I've done at Blackburn Lake Nature Reserve here on Salt Spring Island. And move my. So looking at the yellow flag iris, the strengths of it's an incredible plant. It grows so prolifically, so fast, and really quite anoxic, which is low oxygen conditions. And it creates this thick, dense mat of rhizomes and these waterproof floating seeds. So this is them growing out here. What I've done is I've actually cut the leaves off, so there's only a small amount still remaining here, and then I went and just physically removed all of the rhizomes because they're actually not well, they are difficult to get out, but once you get them out, you can get them out, and once you get them out, it'll take them a long time to get reestablished that way. Now in this area here, we had a great return of cattails and bulrush, and this year I had a huge count of red-legged frog egg masses in this little pond. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too. So when you're doing your invasive plant control, you want those native species there. If you can't, we've done lots of planting around the edges here of willows and shrubs like red osier dogwood and spirea, and it's looking great. The beavers have been going nuts in here too, and I'll be talking about that in a second as well. Now, one of the really important things, in some ways, removing the plant is the easy part, because what takes a lot of work is disposing of all the biomass. So I really like to try and keep the biomass on site. When it comes to something like yellow flag iris, it has such specific growing conditions that if you just take it, put it in a higher elevation, then you're nearly done with it. But a lot of other species are more difficult. But working with various clients, we've developed these sort of systems. It costs a lot, both at the moment, the amount of work to remove this type of biomass, but it also costs a lot environmentally. You drive it, to the, the station. And so I like to keep it on site, that sequester that carbon, that sequester more nutrients. We really want it to rot as fast as possible. So we found this system of putting it under deciduous trees. Maples are the best. So it's exposed in the winter, and it gets a full snow and rain and leaves come down on it as possible, and then it's shaded in the summer, so it takes longer to dry out. We find that the fewer and the larger will be better, faster decomposition, but there is some concern with wildfire risk sometimes. This particular pile of broom, it probably has about 20 of this garbage cans in it. It's, I was stomping on top of it and really crushing it down, and it's going to rot fast, but it's going to take a couple of years. So I think it would be great. In this situation, I recommended that they put a heavy tarp over it in the summer and then remove that tarp in the winter. And do that for a couple of years. You could also cover it with leaves or soil, so anything to reduce that wildfire risk. That's something else we'll talk about a little bit later too. The more important side of things is to plant and protect your native species. Those people who know me know that I'm a bit of a broken record when it comes to this. I was recently working on this lovely little nature reserve called Ruby Alton Nature Reserve. It's on the south of Salt Spring, probably just a few acres right by the ocean. And I was removing some holly there, and I was looking around me, and I realized I was in a little patch of old growth. These were huge trees, definitely in the 150 to 200-year-old. I couldn't see any stumps. It was a beautiful forest. And then I realized in my work on this, I cover every inch of this land practically. I didn't find a single tree under 10 years old, not one single tree. Very, very few shrubs. It was like a village without children. And it hit me hard. We've got to do something. Us, the people who own this land, need to put and protect these species back onto the landscape. Where the imbalance with the deer population is just too extreme. So we need to plant and protect. To start, to figure out what native species you use, just look at similar ones in similar conditions. By this time, you've got your book, you're learning your plants, you know, and then you look at other similar plants. So you talk to a native plant nursery and you think about what can be reintroduced to the landscape. In this picture, this was the Elder Cedar Nature Reserve on Gabriola Island. It's an Islands Trust Conservancy Reserve, and we were doing some reed canary grass control. So we removed all the canary grass and we put in a thick layer of mulch, and then we planted a bunch of cedar and other wetland species that we just saw in the area. And it's all growing really nicely now. Now, it doesn't have to cost you a huge amount though, because you can have your own wonderful little backyard nursery. This is my little nursery. I have maybe 200 to 300, mostly trees and shrubs. A lot of it just comes from weeding. I probably get 50 maples, you know, just from weeding in my area. I could get hundreds of, you know, snowberries and things like that, but also probably 10 or 20 other conifers per year. So, you know, we've all got all of these species, just pot them up, put them somewhere, pile them closely together, somewhere water. You can also find lots of plants in ditches under power lines. If the way I see it, if it's not going to be able to grow to maturity, or if it's going to get dug out like in a ditch, then it should be free picking. And you can also get lots of cuttings. Cuttings are wonderful. This is indigenous plum, formerly known as Indian plum. There's 4 little cuttings, stakes that I put in, and they're all sprouting, all 4 of them. So that's pretty cheap, pretty easy. A lot of our shrubs can be propagated this way, and in other ways. These are hardwood cuttings. You can do softwood cuttings. Lots of information around on that. Really easy, really fun, and then you can get piles of plants going, and then when it's time to plant, stuff them all out there and give them some protection. Speaking of protection, deer, rabbit, and cat exclosures. So again, virtually everything gets browsed in this part of the world. Even things that deer don't actually like to eat, they browse because they're actually really hungry. So, you know, when you're doing an exclosure, you can think about, you know, first of all, what size, because depending on the size of it, you can use different types of posts and different types of fencing. Think about how long it will remain in place. You know, if you're planting a Gary oak, for instance, it's going to have to be there for 10 to 15 years, possibly. Whereas if you're planting a maple, they grow so fast, you could have it gone in 3 years. So it just has to get above deer browse height. That being said, in some ways, it's nice to have it permanent. And I would encourage all of you to find a piece of your land, to put a little deer, rabbit, or cat exclosure, and consider it a permanent nature zone. You know, you can go in there if you want, have it like, but I'm absolutely convinced that wildlife recognize when we make this effort, and they also recognize what's just safe and effective for them. So these are two exclosures that have been put up at Blackburn Lake Nature Reserve. And this top one is the Gary Oak Ecosystem Demonstration Garden, or Gary Oak Demonstration Ecosystem, excuse me. It's going to be flying right now. They just expanded it this year, and it's a pretty neat project. It's hopefully going to be beautiful, and every year just get bigger. And then here on the bottom, this is sort of some experimental work to try and control reed canary grass. So this we did this year. This part on the right is just with willow stakes, and then there's actually cardboard and then mulch on top of it. And then but then we realized that the density that you need and the amount of material made it not really cost effective. So we started thinking about this other system of basically having one tree or shrub per square meter, and then having a nice thick patch of mulch around it to protect it. So we'll see how those go and how effective they are. But what my preferred system, moving the chair, my preferred system for smaller amounts of plants is to use this thinner, this is called stucco wire, and it's got 2-inch square holes, so deer can't put their head through. And it's 4 feet tall, so at this point, sometimes the deer do manage to nibble a couple things on top, but they've never taken everything that I've noticed. Everything has managed to survive. So this is equivalent to 5 feet of fencing. It's approximately 1.6 feet or 8 feet diameter. And so it's good for maybe 1 tree and 1 shrub. And then I use a 5-foot piece of rebar, a metal rebar. And it's very important that it's straight up and down, because even though we don't get a lot of snow, we do get snow. And if it's on the sideways, then it'll crush down. So 5 feet of fence. And then if you want to double the size, you can just use 2 pieces of rebar. So 10 feet fence, which is about 3 feet diameter. And in that you could have, 1 tree and 2 shrubs, or you can make it quite dense if there's not other things. And then there's just one other trick to show you all. If you're doing this on a slope, again, it needs to be straight up and down, so you can see this properly, but you can sort of bend the fencing up. So when it's straight, there's a high side and a low side, and then it'll stay really solid on a really sharp slope. Okay, I know people don't like fencing. I don't like fencing, but this system we found, we try not to use any plastic. Everything is reusable. And we haven't figured out an option at this stage. We're not going to, kill our way out of this deer problem. We're going to have to figure out a way of getting our trees and plants growing. Okay, this is the fun part of my work for sure. Wildlife habitat enhancement, because the more I do it, the more I realize how much it works. And you just get to see the benefits of what you do through just increased biodiversity around you. It's essentially, the idea is to try and create spatial complexity, to try and create those niches. And doing so, you'll, in that process, create food, water, shelter, and locations for protection from predators. So those are the main things that all living creatures need. This picture here, it's just a beautiful Gary oak. That's one of the covenants I work on. And they've got the most incredible amount of biodiversity that they support. It's really actually pretty amazing to some of the research on the amount of lichen and mosses that live on them. And so they know what they're doing. Just a quick chat about one of the projects I do here with the Conservancy. The northern red-legged frog, Rana aurora, is a species of special concern, but there's quite a lot of them here on Salt Spring. You know, most of their habitat or a lot of their habitat has been destroyed, and bullfrogs especially have also done a number to them. So my job, and this picture is with my daughter, my trusty assistant. We canoe the lakes of Salt Spring, and you go around the perimeter and you GPS every egg mass. And one female frog will produce one egg mass, and it's really quite astonishing how large it is. It's, you know, somewhere between a baseball and a softball in size. This year we had some fantastic numbers in Blackburn Lake and the constructed wetland. And so that's a really positive thing about wildlife habitat enhancement. They're really enjoying it. And of course, these eggs and these frogs feed so many other creatures and have all sorts of other things that they do. So it's wonderful to see them. I hope to write up some of the data from this, actually. It's really important to try and share our data, even though, unfortunately, it seems to be one of those things that there's never quite a budget for. So we'll see how that works. So, yes, food. All the critters need food. We kind of think, oh, food, they need, you know, nice berries or something. No, actually, most of our native critters eat bugs. We have 9 species. There might even be one extra here on Salt Spring of bats. Every single one is an insectivore. Think of all of our birds, of course, all of our amphibians, so many of our rodents, you know, either at some point in their life stage or some point in the insect's life stage, they'll be eating insects. So what do insects like? Well, they love complexity. They love piles of sticks. This is bug heaven, and there's always birds scrabbling about in here and who knows what else. They love shrubbery. Get in your shrubbery. And really important, they love their woody debris, large woody debris and small woody debris. You know, there's of course the issue with wildfire, but we'll talk about that momentarily. And there's water and predation. So this is Martha. Martha is our cat. She's my daughter's best friend. And she's pretty mellow, but of course she's a cat, so she wants to catch things. So I have fenced off a pond here. And quite often, Martha will be on one side of the fence and there'll be a bunch of birds on the other side of the fence. And they just seem to understand that's how life is. You know, none of them are dummies. So it's, you know, I've never seen the cats go inside of these exclosures. So it's really something small, but really effective. If you can have a water feature and then protect it, because even if you don't have cats, if you live in a semi-rural or semi-urban area, there will be cats near you, and even if you're in a rural area, to be honest, there's a lot of wild cats out there. So even if you don't have cats, having cat exclosures is still a good thing to do. And of course, water, because I don't know anyone around me who has water features. So I'm pretty sure that a lot of the critters in the neighborhood come over to get a little drink or to clean themselves. Another thing about water is it's loved by beavers. And now I'm going to try and show you a video. I've been doing this wonderful project for the Conservancy, where I've set up a number of cameras, and we're trying to get good video of beaver, and we've got a few good videos. So let's see if this works out. Deborah, please let me know if nothing is visible. Here we go.
Yeah, no, it's working, Chris.
Good. Thanks, Pierre. You can see this was in December, nearly 7 in the morning. So this beaver's probably been working all night, 2 degrees. Brr. Oops. Oh, sorry, just a moment. I just love the psycho beaver. Oh well. Okay, and here's this one other video to see. That was sure is a hard-working beaver, though. But this is just a pretty neat video too.
I might start worrying about the camera just about now.
Oh, you can see just a dinosaur, really. And this is the line made by the beavers, going back and forth into the woods. Okay, I think that's enough. Yeah, so that's been a really really neat project to be part of, and I was super happy to get that footage. So hopefully, you know, they use beavers for wetland restoration in some places. I've heard they will put up the sound of running water, and then you know, get the beavers to build dams in certain places. So they're doing really well at Blackburn. And another thing that we can all do is provide shelter. A lot of our birds and bats and even other smaller creatures use cavities for nesting. And since we, in our wisdom, have cut down most of the large trees, especially the dead ones, there's not many cavities. So you can build your own. Up here, top left, these are 2 maternity bat boxes. I'll show you one in a second. And then these down here are some boxes I made for the Western screech owl. There's a program also run by the Conservancy, at least in part, here on Salt Spring. And then here on the right, it's a swallow nest in my house. It was just funny. I saw the swallows outside, and I ran and I put up the swallow box, and they moved in about 2 minutes, and that was it. They were there, and that was like 5 years ago. And every year I've had swallows, and I really love this picture. It's like a Far Side moment. I opened this, you know, opened the side of the box to take a picture, and if you can see, there's just this one bird with its eye open and looking at me. And I just sort of imagine him turning to his brothers and sisters later. And did you guys see that? They see what? Well, the wall opened up and there's this face at them. Who knows? So let's look at the bird box. Because if you are going to make a bird box, there's no point not doing it properly. People spend a lot of money on fancy painted bird boxes with bits of driftwood stuck on them, and that's not what the critters need. So this is one that I've made. It's got this shape because that's for a swallow. Every bird box, if you make it, I used unpainted secondhand material. They need to have a number of features. You can check, the Conservancy has great links to some information on the size, because they have the size of the hole and the size of the entire box is really specific for different creatures or different species. Other things, it needs good aeration, should be holes up there, and also drainage. So we want holes on the bottom. And you're going to need to have a door so you can open it up and clean it. Because no bird wants to move into an old yucky bed, though it actually looks lovely. We were looking at it. There's a huge pile of, probably can't see it, but there's a lot of this rabbit hair in here, and there's lovely soft moss. It would have been a great little spot to grow up. So make your boxes and you got to clean them. You got to clean them every year. Tomorrow, I want you all to go out and clean them. If you've got boxes, make sure they're all clean, no spiders in there, no wasps or anything. Make sure they're ready. And hopefully somebody will move in. Another program I've been part of quite a bit is the bat program here. We put up, I've built and put up quite a lot of these maternity bat boxes, and it's big and heavy. Hopefully you can see there's a whole bunch of levels in there so the bats can thermoregulate better. They can move, you know, to different parts of the box depending depending on what they need at that moment. It needs to be put up in a pretty specific way, you know, quite high with a good flyway. All that information is also available. Salt Spring Island Conservancy, but you know, bats are really wonderful creatures. They do a lot of good for our ecosystem, and I think they're also a wonderful mystery. So they're out there, but they're not really interacting with us very much. But put up a bat box. If you can only put up a smaller box, that's okay. They might use it as just a day roost or for temporary, but it's still of use to them. So the shelter is really quite important. Okay. Good. And the final little, the third part of that environmental stewardship tripod here is wildfire risk reduction. Obviously, we're all really not necessarily all of us, but there's a lot of concern about wildfire risk on the Gulf Islands. I remember the Galliano fire, which started at a work site. I don't know what that was, 5 years ago, I'm not quite sure, but that had pretty serious potential. But wildfire is a very important part of our coastal forest ecosystem. First Nations knew this. They set their own fires, they prescribed controlled burns, and that's a big part of the Garry Oak Meadows that we see. But you know, we, especially as we've moved into, you know, the forest, we've suppressed wildfire, and so you get a buildup of fuel, a buildup of dry wood, and just a much higher risk. but you know, the actual job of wildfire risk is just using those same tools I showed you earlier, and it has some great benefits to the forest as well as making it safer for us, because you're bringing the fuel to the forest floor, and to decompose and to provide habitat for moss and fungus and many other creatures. So, and in the process, you're sequestering the carbon, sequestering water in the sense that it becomes more of a water sink. And then you're also sequestering nutrients on site. So it's a very positive thing for the forest. It also brings a lot of light to the forest floor, which encourages lush growth, which is also a way to sort of reduce your wildfire risk. So the way I approach wildfire risk reduction is a little bit different than fire starting, as promoted by, say, the Ministry of Forests, or your local fire guys, because I think it's really important to assess the decomposition, and for stuff that's decomposing, it's not really such a big risk, and you have to think long term as well. So if you see wood that has mushroom and conchs on it, or if there's moss growing on it, or if it's just in contact with the soil and you could see, then it's a much lower wildfire risk. Now, that being said, the way Fire Smart works is it sort of has these priority zones, and the priority zone number 1 is this sort of 10-meter area from your house. And without being too dogmatic about it, I would really recommend following their recommendations in this priority zone area. The work I am thinking about happens a bit further away from the buildings. Yeah, it's, there's always going to be the balance between getting rid of a risk and the long-term forest health. And so I'm trying to find the right spot there. You can always, so yes, let's talk about wildfire just a little bit here, because when we're talking about wildfire in the coastal forest, it has certain, 3 main characteristics we should think about. One is ignition, and then there's spread, and then there's intensity. So ignition, where is the fire going to light? And basically, in this part of the world, it's not usually lightning, it's nearly always people. So where people are, you have an ignition risk, homes, roads, trails, work sites. Another thing, tall grasses along the roadside, especially people parking hot cars on tall, dry grass. That's a serious ignition risk. And then also, there's certain areas you'll see in forests where there's sort of things become deposited and they build up, and it's a bit fluffy of twigs. Like, see if I could sort of explain it. Like, here's your tree, say, and there's your slope. So on this upper little section here, you'll often get a little buildup of twigs and such things. So that's an area that you might want to try and clean out if it's close to, where people are. The next thing to think about is your spread. If a fire does start, it's going to need fuel to get around the landscape. In some places, we have this continuous layer of fuel, and so we want to sort of break that up. A good thing to do is to try to create a fire break between any homes. So a fire break is just an area where there's really no fuel. That's often how they combat wildfires. And yeah, try and clear along beside roadways, because like I say, things can spread along the road, get started and then spread along the road. And the third characteristic is the intensity. So an intense forest fire does damage to an ecosystem. It can burn the carbon out of the soil. It can, burn all of the seeds. Many seeds are adapted to fire. They even like fire. But if fire gets too hot, then they're not going to come out of that. So when you have large suspended, like in the air, woody debris, you want to get that woody debris down to the ground in contact with the soil. And you also want to remove ladder fuels. Ladder fuels are the dead branches that you'll see on the trunk, often lower down, like especially firs. As they get taller and it gets shadier closer to the forest floor, then they'll sort of kill off those branches and they'll die, and they'll become a way for the fire to climb up a tree into the crown. And that's when you're getting into a really serious fire. So we want to stop the fire from getting into the crown. So how do you do this? Well, you collect it all and you've got to put it somewhere. So this is a system I've worked out with the various clients over the years. And this is one specific place that had a huge buildup. There's so much dead wood everywhere and a lot of dead standing trees as well. So the first thing I did was I collected all of the smaller stuff and I piled it again as densely as possible using that whole spaghetti method where everything's, you don't want it all crumbled, as tight as possible, stomping on it. And then I kept all of the larger woody stuff to the side, and then I put that as a cap over top. And the idea is that this will pretty rapidly compress and rot. It won't be immediate. It is going to be a risk. So we were careful to remove, this picture doesn't show it so well, but we removed a lot of any woody debris that was close to it, so it wasn't connected in that way. And then we also planted some deciduous shrubs on both sides of it, so that'll grow up and start shedding its leaves down and shading it. So you can bet that these piles are going to be hot spots for wildlife. They love this sort of thing. It's wonderful habitat for all sorts of creatures. And the other thing, you can't see it so well, but like for instance, back here, the larger logs I leave on the ground. You don't leave a lot, but when you think about it, if you're a little critter, you do not want to run across this open area. You want to be able to scurry along beside a log like that. Otherwise, that owl is going to get you. And the same thing, these sort of logs, they create sites for microsites, little shady spots where a seed will have a greater chance of sprouting. So these are all sort of features you think about when you're trying to do your best to reduce your wildfire risk, but for the long-term health and the complexity of the area, there's certain things you can do to encourage all of that, biodiversity. The transformation, I just have to say that the transformation of this land, it was just awesome to watch how it greened up. There's also piles of Daphne everywhere. So I removed the Daphne at the same time and used the same pile. And so that's part of the efficiency of doing these different wild stewardship activities at the same time. Yeah, so I think I have time here. I can go quickly into, this is my last little section about just trying to create a multi-year stewardship plan, because you're not going to get all the work done, in 1 year or even 5, who knows. But now hopefully you've got your idea. Okay, I know where I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to do this area and this planting for this year. Try and combine these different activities so you get the higher efficiency, which brings down your personal cost and also brings down the local and global impacts. Like I was saying, the less you walk on the land, the better when it comes to it. So timing is a huge, huge part of this. You know, it's just so important when you're planting native species that aren't going to get watered or fertilized or anything. You want to get them there as soon as the plants are dormant, you know, October, as soon as it starts getting cold and dark, get those plants in so they can sit there, get saturated, you know, get their roots down into the soil. You know, if you wait till February or March to do your planting, sometimes we'll be hit with a hot week in early May or something, and those roots just haven't had the time to get established yet. And also, you know, when we're thinking about the whole idea of the web of life underground, that's also part of it, getting those native species in contact with all of that web of life. So try and get it in there October to January. If you're doing invasive plant work, really try and you're pulling the plants, really try and do it when the soils are saturated so you minimize the impact. And also really put the soil back down. If you make a mess, often that exposed mineral soil is the ideal germination site for the invasive plant that you're trying to get rid of. So we want that moss layer to stay intact. And really no tree work, and try and reduce all of your work, to be honest, during the active wildlife months, which is, you know, more or less May to September, even earlier. For instance, right now, you should not be doing work in the wetland. There's just too many eggs around. The Conservancy has just sort of adopted this idea. We're not doing any invasive plant control anymore from May to September. Originally that was, you know, to reduce disrupting birds, but then it sort of became apparent that whether it's birds or insects or whatever, so many of our native species, they compress all of their life stages into this really short period, and it's all very intense. So the less we're there, the better. So this is actually where that pile of wood was. It's a 5-acre piece of land, and this is a house in the middle. And so to make a stewardship plan for this piece of land, I divided it up into sort of ecosystem types or whatever made sense, and then sort of tried to estimate, you know, how much time it would take to do all of the things. And we made a 5-year plan. So this table shows the plan for 2021. So in each of those zones, we had different activities to do, you know, whether it was wildfire risk reduction or tree management and restoration was kind of the same as native planting. This hedge pond thing was just something specific, you know, for their, you know, their particular needs. But I want to draw your attention to the amount of time here. We're talking, 16.5 days that, you know, they've committed to work, plus, you know, buying all of the plants and the fencing. So they're investing a good chunk of money into this. And I think that's just wonderful, because some people have money, and if they have money, then this is a really good way to spend it, simply. So hopefully on your land, you've got an idea now, if you're looking at what you can do either on your land or on a piece of protected land that you're involved with working on. You can sort of get this idea of how you can combine these 3 stewardship activities, you know, work out your priorities and really try and get the maximum bang for your eco buck. Yeah, and just my final slide here, I always want to try and promote this idea of stewardship as a profession. You know, we're sort of leaving it up to volunteers to do all of this. Well, volunteers can't do it all. This is the ultimate green job, I really think. you know, if we're actually going to scale up, you know, to the next level, the things we're doing to address climate change, to address the biodiversity crisis, we need to take this to a whole new level. We need to be training a lot of young people. I have this idea of student stewards, kind of like the idea of student painters. You know, you get that sort of flyer every year about student painters, and it's kind of a franchise thing. But, you know, you can just imagine these wonderful groups of young, powerful people going around doing this wonderful work. It would be hopefully good for the pocketbook, but certainly good for their mind. Anyone who's looking at this and thinks, I wonder if I could do this. Yeah, you could. I really think there's a huge amount of work on this. I'm a contractor, you know, make sure you've got all of your insurances, do it right. I think that's a really smart way to go. Your medical insurance and your personal insurance. And advertise and go for it. Feel free to contact me if you want to talk about that. And I kind of have this sort of bit of a dream of creating a kind of cooperative, environmental stewardship cooperative, but even beyond that, where it's a true business, everyone's making a good living, doing good work, but we pool our resources, we can be more efficient, we can have a lower footprint. You know, it's sort of creating a situation where you just sort of believe in a future where humans share the planet as opposed to own it. I thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in.
Thank you so much, Chris. Wow. Okay. I learned a lot of things here. I just went out today at Thimble Farms and picked up some of the Indian plum or wild native plum plants. I'm thinking now I'm going to chop them all up in pieces and try to multiply them before
Yeah,
I put them in.
why not?
Yeah, so one plant goes a long way. I do that already with alders, but I didn't know I could do that with the native plums.
Yeah,
So let me put a few
great.
questions to you that have come in during your talk. So the first ones go back to the whole issue of cuttings. And the question was about timing and whether we've now passed the time or whether there's still time now to take cuttings for hardwoods, cuttings for softwoods, and also when you've got those cuttings, what sort of soil do you use in your sort of home setup?
Well, first of all, hardwood cuttings are generally supposed to be done when the plant is dormant. So we're kind of beyond that right now. There might be some that you might still have luck. Some plants just root super easy. It's definitely worth trying, but we're nearly getting to the stage where you can do something called softwood cuttings. But you'll have to look into, find a propagation book. It's pretty basic sort of propagation method. Yes, yeah.
My understanding is it also depends a lot on the plant. Some plants are very, very easy. Alders, I go out and take alders from ditches and I go plump, 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 plump at the bottom of my yard and they all come out unless the deer get them first.
Yeah, willows are the same. And certainly the indigenous plum is super easy, but a lot of snowberry is super easy.
And what sort of soil do you use for those cuttings?
Well, I just like to cause trouble, so I will not buy soil. So I find I can find a lot of soil in patches where say leaves have been deposited for years and years and years. You can often scrape aside the leaves and get a chunk of soil out of there. And then I'll take sort of forest soils and I'll mix it with some chips and my own compost. At the Conservancy, we have a bit of topsoil that we mix with well-rotted chips. And those all seem to be pretty good. With native plants, it's less about nutrients than it is about soil, soil moisture. So you want to have, we're moving away from using peat moss. So one thing you can do is chips. Well-rotted chips are a great way to hold moisture in soil.
Right, and that there's certainly in BC, there's no shortage of that.
No, no way.
So speaking of moisture, so some people were talking about the future. You haven't talked about climate change, but it's definitely happening on this island. People are worried about some of the cedars, and the cedars not doing well. My own thinking on that is that we could do a lot better in preserving the hydrology of this island, keeping some of the areas suitable for cedars a long time into the future by not buggering up the slopes and changing the hydrology. But what is your feeling about trees of the future? Some people have started planting sequoias. Some people have advocated other species. Where do you sit on that?
I think this is really interesting conversation. When it comes to cedars, they're definitely going to be moving northward in their habitat. So we're already at the southern fringe. So what's going to probably happen in the future is there's going to be areas like refugia where the cedars will be able to survive for longer periods. Those would be sort of east-facing or north-facing slopes, wetlands,
creek bottoms,
ravines, creek bottoms.
Yep.
But another thing about cedar is deer, because cedar have a very shallow root system. And when you have deer who just love, if you look on Blackburn, every single cedar is absolutely shaved from the ground to 5 feet in the air. Pardon me? Bonsai, yes. So not only that affects the soil moisture intensely, and as well, actually, the pounds per square inch of a deer on their hoofs, especially if they're standing on 2 feet, is really quite high. So they actually can compact that soil. So there's some belief that cedars are getting a double whammy here on the island because of the effect of deer. I'm a really big fan of cedar, and to be honest, every cedar that I planted and protected did really well through the heat dome. It was really quite surprising at Blackburn. We didn't lose any of them, and I didn't water them.
I think we should do our best to try to protect habitat on this island for cedars. It's a tree of life. There's a huge symbolic First Nations importance. It's an important tree here on the coast.
Yeah, and then the other idea, well, okay, now that it's getting warmer, should we be doing sequoias or trees that are more adapted to hotter climates? And there could be some benefit to that, and perhaps that should be started in some places, but we also have our own trees that are adapted. And so, for instance, that Garry Oak demonstration ecosystem at Blackburn Lake, well, that wouldn't have been a Garry Oak ecosystem originally. It would have been fir and cedar, but they think now it's actually a prime spot to have a nice Garry Oak grove. So I'm a really big fan of the Garry Oaks. Actually, they put down deep tap roots, and if you have a hot site, they're a really good option. Yeah,
and that also is a very, very important system from a First Nations point of view because of the camas and whatnot. So yeah, that's a great one. So let's move on to wetlands now. So some people said in their visits to Blackburn, they noticed that the beavers were getting into some of the exclosures and taking down the cottonwood. So what are you going to do about that?
Well, I suppose, if it's in my contract, I'll go and put a fence around the cottonwood.
How are beavers getting into the exclosures anyway?
They can fit, basically. They're squirmy little things, and they're about the size of a cat, and it's not, a lot of that fencing isn't the type that has a really good rabbit, and some of them, they've got the really close rabbit sort of fencing, but that fencing wasn't that type. So And originally I thought, okay, well, they can have a bite and take a bit and then it'll resprout. But no, they gnawed the whole thing completely down. So yeah, that was, well, it was a good investment for the beavers.
Well, we do love beavers. Okay. Uh, so let's see. Um, Fuel ladders. So some people have expressed concerns about um, taking down lower branches on cedars, especially, and because a number of bird species like to use those ladders to go up and down the trees, like kinglets and whatnot. So I replied, and maybe that was me. I replied back in the chat saying, well, like, consider this something that you need to do only very, very near to your house for trees that could present a fire hazard. But beyond that is not necessary. What's your view on this?
Well, one of the things I like to do is leave good healthy stubs. So you don't cut the branch flush to the tree or flush to the trunk. You can leave a nice 6-inch or a foot or 2-foot stub, and that's a place that the birds can perch and that moss can grow on. It can become a microsite. I think that's a really good observation, and so that's a whole idea of finding a way to get the balance right, and it'll be different for every site. But I love that thought. It's not only about completely protecting us. So yeah, leave a stub there a little bit, and that should help the birds. I also, when I'm cutting, say, a dead standing tree, I'll cut the stump really high, around 5 feet high or something.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just a little bit of that 3-dimensional diversity. And so the whole stub idea, leaving a bit of a branch, is still part of that complexity, creating complexity.
Yeah. Do you think 5 feet's enough? I was thinking more in the 10 to 15. I mean, if you have to take down a tree, say it's a danger tree, it's going to there's a danger of it coming down on your house, whatnot. In terms of leaving a snag for woodpeckers and other wildlife, shouldn't it be a little bit taller than 5 feet?
Well, I guess I'm speaking about smaller diameter trees.
Okay.
I probably personally wouldn't even be touching those larger diameter ones. That would be something I'd leave to a professional, but a smaller diameter one, I'm just there by myself. I'm not climbing the tree or bringing a ladder in. So, I mean, but that's a good point. If you could, leave a higher wildlife tree and still, have a low wildfire risk, that's a great idea. Yeah.
I mean, certainly here, yeah, we got a pileated will be in there like a dirty sock if you leave a nice snag.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, and while we were talking here, a few more questions came in. Okay, somebody says, I disagree with your cedar thoughts. I've observed that they are doing well in areas where they can put down their roots deeply. The ones that are dying and are shallow wetland soils. So, which is sort of echoing what I was saying, that there's a room for cedars on this island. They may not survive everywhere, but certainly there are a number of habitats where they will continue to do well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've seen cedars that are dying and their roots are like right beside a stream. And so I guess we've all observed many things, and it's good that we talk about it and try and figure things out. But yeah, I'm definitely a fan of trying to get those cedars growing if you can.
I totally agree. Here's another point that came out. I've noticed in my neighborhood that many of the juvenile fir under 10 years are grand fir rather than Doug firs. Have you noticed any advantage to grand fir recently, or is there perhaps a greater fruiting year 15 years ago? Are they less preferred by deer? Have you noticed a shift from one species to the other?
No, I haven't. I must say I've noticed that some areas have a higher density of grand fir than other areas, often slightly wetter areas. But I do think that maybe they are a little bit less appealing to the deer. Yeah, and that's wonderful. You're in a place where there are, lots of young trees. I find that often along roads and trails, there'll be more young trees. And my personal idea is that when it comes to deer, their only real predator is a car. So they'll just keep away a little bit from where cars are. But
What's your thought on rabbits? I mean, of course, we have this infamous person on this island who brought in rabbits from Victoria, and they've been a plague here ever since. Some people feel that they're only a problem from a point of view of vegetable gardens. I'm a little more concerned that that rabbits are going to make their way into our woodlands at some point. Have you seen evidence of that? And what's your feeling on deer and our natural ecosystems here on island? Or sorry, not deer. I mean rabbits.
right. Yeah, I guess I haven't seen their effects personally, but I just learned of something recently. I know that there's an interesting restoration project about Mount Tuam that's being run by some of the local biologists, and they were finding that the deer or the rabbit browse is increasing up there, and they're quite, and they can tell because of the angle of the bite on the plants. But absolutely, they can be a serious issue in certain areas. I know that the exclosure up at Andreas Volk Nature Reserve that has rabbit protection around it.
Right, Susan made that point that was made necessary by the attack of rabbits.
Yep, yeah, and we have also put that around the Gary Oak demonstration ecosystem, but not around all of it. So that's another bit of work to be done.
One of my own questions and comments here about cats. I happen to be one of those believers that thinks that cats should be indoors. They're a problem more than in aquatic systems, but certainly in terms of the birds and reptiles and other critters that they will take. So there's a thought that maybe a fencing is not always the only solution for cats, but maybe keeping them indoors would be.
You know, absolutely. I mean, some communities are making it illegal to have cats out now. You can make things like a catio, which is, you know, if you want your cat to be outside, you can have a small area where they can go that's outside. To be honest, I just lost that battle within my family. And so we have a cat, and it, you know, it roams, but like I said too, there's just so many cats around. Even if you don't have it, there's going to be cats around you at this stage. Maybe in 10 years we won't have that problem. I'd be very happy if that was the way.
Yeah, I've heard mixed results from, you know, putting bells around their necks or whatnot, and there are stories of cats that are basically, you know, hunting their prey by putting one paw on the bell so that it won't betray their presence.
Yeah.
So on the question of rabbits, someone made a comment that they've seen lots of damage on Camas, Tritilia, Gary Oaks. So people are seeing damage from rabbits in natural areas.
Well, one of the interesting, so just to jump in, one of the interesting things is that cats keep rabbits away. So in places where there's cats, you'll have fewer rabbits.
Yes, I agree. There is we had a neighborhood Jack Russell, which I brought in a couple of times to get the rabbits in my yard. And it was all good until it came back with a garter snake, and I kind of lost interest in the Jack Russell at that point. Okay, last question, unless there are more coming in from folks. Somebody was asking, well, first of all, a lot of people were really happy with your presentation, Chris, and really enjoyed your sort of down-to-earth style and of presentation. Somebody was asking if they are interested in restoration. What is a good path for transitioning into that type of career?
I suppose I like to think of restoration as being a skilled job. In other words, you need a pretty good base of knowledge. So that would be depending what amount of environmental knowledge you have, but I think you need to really understand your species and all the different types of creatures. Once you get to a place where you understand that, the truth is that most of my work is pretty grunt work. There's a lot of just digging and hauling and whatever it is. So you got to be ready for that, because many people go into university thinking a career in restoration is kind of going to be about research, but the truth is, there's a lot less work in research than there is in just just doing it. Yeah. So I guess the best, just go for it, do it, learn all you can.
What about the I think there's some restoration or type of diplomas. UVic, I think, has a program in restoration ecology or landscape ecology. What do you think of those?
There's at UVic, there's one program called Restoration of Natural Systems. I've been in a little bit of contact with them. It seems like a great program, because you can either do a sort of diploma, or you can just do courses, or you can get a higher degree out of it. So that's a pretty interesting place to start. I would also really encourage volunteering. Volunteering is huge. If anyone's around and wants to contact Salt Spring Conservancy,
yes,
and want to do some weeding, there's a lot of weeding to do.
We're always looking for volunteers.
Yeah, but you learn a lot when you're weeding.
Yes, you do. Okay. Unless there's anything else. If anybody, I'll give you 15 seconds. If you've got a burning question, just put it on the chat line now, and we can ask Chris. Otherwise, we will call it a day. Going.
All right.
Going. Gone. Chris, thank you again so much. It was really nice. Very, as I said, down to earth, full of good ideas, and I think everybody enjoyed it very much.
All right. And don't forget to clean your bird boxes.
No. And the main reason for that is parasite load. If you don't clean out the bird box from year to year, the parasite load will really increase and make it really hard for those nestlings. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chris.
Good night, everyone.
That's great. Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
It's wonderful to see these wonderful names.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Deborah.